I've been a member less than 30 years here at this congregation. You can go ahead and be seated. So 30 years would be about 1985. So if you've been a member here over 30 years, okay, the rest of you, I'd like for you to kind of look around and see those that are standing, not to point out and say that they are old necessarily. But I want to honor those of you. Some of you, you've been here 40 years or 50 years. You've been a member of this congregation. So I'd like to just kind of give you a time of honor for just a moment. So let's give them a round of applause. Go ahead and be seated. Those that were standing, you have sacrificed for this group that gathers here. You have sacrificed to pay for preachers. You've sacrificed to pray for missionaries. You've sacrificed to build this building that we are able to gather in outside of the weather. And I wanted to do that because my generation, the young generation, too often we approach you and we start to criticize all the things that we think you got wrong and the ways that maybe we feel like you have hindered the movement of God, and we don't take the moment to honor you for the example that you have given to us. That you have been an example of one that has been devoted to the body of Christ. And so to paraphrase words that were attributed to Isaac Newton, that if we are able to see far, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. There are generations that have gone before that have made all kinds of sacrifices for even your generation to do what you have done. So we honor you this morning. I'll come back to why I wanted to honor you this morning in just a moment. But those of you that are members here, you experience something in this place with this body that gathers here that you cannot get anywhere else. And it is because of that we have been emphasizing that Easter is coming. And that Easter is a time of year when so many people that don't go to church, that don't really have much of a faith to speak of, that they are open to attending church, and they wouldn't necessarily be open to any other time of year. And we want to capitalize on this season. So I'm encouraging you to be in prayer, that there is somebody in your life that you would be open to see the door, to invite them to come and join us. We have flyers that are up on the kind of hanging folders on the sides of the auditorium. They're also in the back tables back there that are about our Easter weekend services, the Good Friday and then the Easter Sunday service. I want you to take those and to hand them out in whatever way you see fit. But I ask that if you hand it to your waiter and use that as a, please tip well. Don't just leave that saying, here's your tip. Tip well. Be an example of generosity and the generosity that God has given to us. Because we have received so many blessings. We can't help but share those blessings with this world. We have a heart here at this church for the city, for everyone that we come into contact with. It is our goal, it is our mission, our hope and dream that we can share the gospel of Christ with every single person that we come into contact with. And no, not every one of them will join us here in this building, in this place, but we want as many people as we can get to be here as well, to worship with us, to grow with us, to become disciples of Christ. So we've been studying over the last month, a study that I have titled Anothering, as we are looking at the way the church is called to live in community with one another. That there are over 30 commands in the New Testament that you cannot fulfill if you are not in relationship, if you are not in community with other followers of Christ. Over 30 commands. And we've just taken some time to look at just a few of them. And this morning I want to turn our attention, and I don't think gathered in a belief that Jesus rose from the grave. So I want you to turn your Bibles with me to Acts chapter 2. After Jesus ascended into heaven, there was only a small group of people that was gathered. But on the day of Pentecost was a special Jewish holiday. So there were people from all over the world that gathered in Jerusalem on this day. Peter stands up and he preaches and convicts thousands of people. We're told that over 3,000 come and they are baptized into Christ. They are baptized for the remission of their sins and receive the promise of the Holy Spirit. Now I want us to look at the way that they live with one another. Acts 2, verse 40. With many other words, he warned them and pleaded with them, "Save yourselves from this corrupt generation." Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at many wonders and signs that the apostles performed. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. What a miraculous day that must have been. Not the fact that there were 3,000 that came and were being baptized. To some extent, we experience that. We see that happen on occasion. We see these mass meetings where people come and they respond. And yes, it's not to deny that God's hand was in that. But what I find more miraculous is that they were together. They were together. It would be so easy to be divided. We are a divided nation. I can just speak the words Selma or Ferguson, and you know that we're a divided nation. We don't even have a common vocabulary that we can communicate between generations, between classes of people, between races. We don't even share the common vocabulary, and it's difficult for us to be together. We're divided. But they were together. And who are the they? Who are the they that's together here? Acts 2, verse 5 tells us, literally, that there were people gathered there from every nation under heaven. And these are the same group that they're amazed that they are hearing Peter speak and the other apostles speak in their own language because they have a language barrier. So this group that is gathered, that they are together, they are just as diverse, if not more diverse, than we are gathered here in this room, than we are as a nation in the United States of America. They were a diverse people, and yet they were together. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing whenever the church functions the way that it is supposed to. Whenever our anothering is right, and it is just beautiful. Whenever I was in college, Allie and I got married before we graduated with our undergraduate degree, and we transferred to a new school. My wife loves music. She started her undergraduate program as a music major. And so whenever we went to this new school, she wanted to join the choir. Now, I am not a music person, which is kind of funny that Andy would kind of slip and say that before I stand up to sing, because you don't want to hear me sing. I am what you call a prison singer. I'm always behind a few bars and I can never find the right keys. That is who I am. And so whenever she wanted to do this, I did just to be with her, just to hang around with her, but we had to try out. And I was gathered in the room with the choir professor, and just him and me, and he would play a note on the piano and he'd ask me to repeat it. And I'm pretty sure that I wasn't anywhere close, but he allowed me to join, not because of, if you allow me to use this language, not because of my righteousness, but because of someone else's righteousness. And he wanted that other person to be there. And because of that other person's righteousness, I was allowed to be a part of this group. And there wasn't anyone that was just a great singer. No one had a perfect pitch. No one was great, but together we were pretty good. And there were moments that we could kind of step back and we could say, man, that was beautiful. And that's what I see in the church. That we all have these different parts, and some of us, we're a little bit more mature, we're a little bit more advanced, some of us, we're a little bit more in tune with the gospel than others, but whenever we all gather, whenever we're all together, you can step back and say, man, it's beautiful. There's just nothing like it anywhere in the world. But it doesn't come easy. And that's why Luke tells us in verse 42 that they devoted themselves. They devoted themselves to fellowship. They were stubbornly persistent in fellowship. Alvin Gentry was an example of stubborn devotion. At the age of 73, Alvin received word that his brother had had a stroke, and his brother lived 240 miles away. And because of his strong desire, his affection for his brother, he wanted to be there. But at the age of 73, and because of some failing eyesight, his driver's license had been taken from him. And so Alvin Gentry decides that he's going to take his newly purchased, and yet it was about 30 years old, John Deere 110 tractor mower, and he was going to drive 240 miles to go and be with his brother. He gets about 20 miles down the road and his tractor breaks down. He has to spend $250 to repair that tractor. Then he sets out again. After 90 miles, he ran out of money. And to save on money, he wasn't staying in hotels or anything. He was staying in a 10-foot makeshift camper that he was pulling with this lawnmower. He spends the last bit of money he has to call his wife. Eventually, he makes it to Wisconsin to see his brother. As you hear that, you know that's just foolishness. There's nothing logical about that. To get on a tractor and go 5 miles an hour for 240 miles just to see somebody. But that is a stubborn will, a stubborn devotion to a relationship. And there was no obstacle that was going to get in his way to prevent him from being there. That's what the Bible means whenever it says that they were devoted to fellowship. Now, I don't know that we grasp what he is, the severity of what he's talking about here. Look at the context of what they are devoting themselves in. Look at verse 42. They devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship. Now, I would guess that if next week you show up to this place and we decide, the Lord's Supper, the breaking of the bread that we just participated in, that we just shared it together, we've decided we're not going to do that this week. I would imagine there would be some of you that you would be a little bit upset. If we decided that next week, and you came into this building next Sunday morning, and there was not a single prayer that was offered, you would not leave this place thinking, oh man, that was some good church. I mean, these are the things that we have in our minds as being necessary for us to experience what we call worship service, or what we may call church. We think that these have to be present. Now, if you show up next week, and I don't stand up here and preach, you might be happy next week, but if it's the next week, if over a period of time there is no teaching that takes place whenever we gather together, you would be upset and you would start looking for another place to gather. Then why is it? In the same context, he's saying that they devoted themselves to all these other things, that we believe that fellowship, that relationships are optional. Why is it that we believe that we can enter into these doors and we can not speak to anybody, we can sit down and we can pray and we can sing and we can listen to somebody talk for a little bit and then leave, that all of a sudden we have done what God has required of us? But whenever you look at what the first church did, as we just sang, they were known by their love. And you can't love somebody unless you're in a relationship with them. Unless you are devoted to them. And that's why I wanted to honor those of you that have been here for 30 years. Because over that 30 years, there have been some wonderful times, but there have also been some awful times. There have been some times, and there's been some years, some seasons of this church's history where you were miserable. And yet, you were devoted to the people that were gathered. I want you to notice this morning two ways that their devotion to fellowship, their devotion to one another was put on display. First, they were devoted to attend. Now, what I am about to say can't come across as being angry, but I'm not angry. I am saying this out of a deep concern for you and the love that I have for you. So, in order to try and keep it light, I want to begin with a bad joke. There were 3 church leaders from different churches that were gathered together talking about that they all 3 were having squirrel problems in their church buildings. The first church leader says, well, we set out traps, but we can't seem to get the squirrels in the traps. The second leader says, we set traps as well. We've caught them, we took them, and we released them outside, but they keep getting back inside the building. And the third leader says, we don't have problems with squirrels anymore. And the first 2 looked at him and said, how did you get rid of them? He said, oh, it was easy. We just baptized them and we hadn't seen them since. There's a lot made about the decline of Christianity in America. There are some experts that spend their time studying church trends, that they suggest that it's actually not an overall turn away from faith in Christ, but rather people who attend church are attending less often. So if you take a church of 1,000, let's just make the math kind of easier. Take a church of 1,000, and those that are members there, they attend 3 Sundays out of the month. Your average attendance 750. If that same church of 1,000 and they attend 2 Sundays out of the month, that church is now experiencing an average of 500. And I think there may be some validity to that argument. That we still have the same number of names on the roll. The problem is that you just simply aren't attending as often. But look, they were devoted to attend. Acts 2, verse 46. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Acts 5 goes on and tells us that day after day in the temple courts and from house to house. 2 separate passages we have told that they could not get enough of each other. That they weren't just meeting on Sundays, they were meeting together. They were so devoted to one another that every single day they were together. I read recently that the average child that grows up in church attends 1.4 worship services a month, which means that they spend more time in a week on video games than they do in a year inside the doors of a church building. And I'm telling you that we're getting away from what the first church did. And again, I don't say this because I'm angry and that in some sense my job lies on the fact that you show up, but out of my deep concern for you. Because what is happening is we are filling our schedules so full that the only time we have to rest anymore is on Sundays. And so we rest, we stay home on Sundays, and we don't gather with the Lord's people. Last Sunday I was watching my 3 girls as my wife was singing on the praise team. And I say I was watching the 3, I was really watching the 1-year-old. The other 2 were sitting with others. And Anna Lee, she was eating snacks of goldfish, the goldfish crackers, the little orange things with the smile. I don't know why we have this obsession with eating animals that have smiles, but that's a separate rant. And so she was eating these goldfish snacks. She starts eating them, just cramming them in her mouth, and her cheeks are puffing out like a chipmunk. So I take her sippy cup, and I start to try and give her a drink, and she just throws a fit. I mean, just flailing all about, screaming, because her mouth was so full of the things that she wanted that there was no room for what she desperately needed. And the irony is, what she was filling her mouth with what she wanted to fill her mouth with only increased the necessity of what she had no room for. Some of you, your schedules are so crammed full, and you are just so exhausted that there is no room for you to be devoted to anything else. And my deepest fear for you is that your life is crumbling all around you. And what you are filling your life with is increasing the need, what you don't have any room for. They were devoted to attend. There was this devotion to attend that allowed them to overcome so many things. This devotion to one another. In Acts chapter 6, whenever this racial discrimination comes up inside the church that could have divided them, it didn't, because they were devoted to one another. And in verse 7, we're told that the number increased rapidly. In Acts 15, whenever another division rises up, and this is an ethnic divide between the Gentiles and the Jews, something again that could have divided the church, they are devoted to one another. So James speaks up and he says, it's my judgment, verse 19, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. I'm devoted to them, and so I'm not going to put a block in between them and coming to God. The Gentiles, whenever they hear, they read it, they were glad, they were encouraged by this message. There's the devotion to one another that allows them to survive, to thrive in the midst of all of the persecution that they were facing. But it wasn't just enough for them to be devoted to attend. Secondly, I want you to notice that they were devoted to attending. Verse 44, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to everyone who had need. There may not be any other passage in the Bible that causes Western Christianity more anxiety than this one. Because we immediately begin to push back against this, because we have been ingrained with all of the evils of socialism. And so we say, we don't really have to have anything in common. But my question is, whenever we push so hard back against this, is it revealing what we are truly devoted towards? Are we devoted to the kingdom of God, or devoted to our own kingdom? I used to have these vivid dreams of whenever I first started to have kids and have a family, somebody coming and breaking into my house. And in every one, I would take my most valuable possessions and I would make sure that they were safe. What haunted me is it was things like my laptop. It was my phone. All the while, my wife and my kids are left stranded. And then there's no way that I could go to my wife and say, I'm really devoted to you. I really love you. And then whenever she has a need, I'm taking care of something else and say, you know my heart. Yes, she may know my heart, but she also sees the way that I'm living. The first church, they were so devoted, so committed to one another, that they were sacrificing things that they had, their own possessions, and things that they may need at some point down the road, to give to others. Rodney Stark, in his book, The Rise of Christianity, points to this idea as one of the catalysts that allowed Christianity to grow from this small group of 120 in this small region of the Middle East to now it has scattered all over the globe. Because no other movement has just had this expansive growth in the way that this has, crossing all cultural boundaries. And what he's done is he goes back and looks through the history, and there's times whenever Christianity should have died out, but it flourished. And what he noted was the way that they loved one another, the way that they attended to the needs of others. In the first century, it was legal in the Roman world that if you didn't want a child within the first 8 days or so, if it wasn't pleasing to you, all you had to do was you had to just set it outside and leave it, and it was just kind of left to die. It was called exposure. You just left this child to die. So if you didn't want a girl and you were given a girl, you just left it out into the field and left it to die. But the Christians came along and they started taking these orphans and they would take them into their own homes and they would give out of their own means and they would care for them. Which by all logical means says that they're going to diminish their own resources. During the Black Plague, it was devastating. Everyone was dying. And yet Christians, they were taking in people who were sick and they were creating hospitals. They didn't have that language. They didn't have any kind of medical these sick people can come and die with dignity. And what you discover whenever you go back and look at the history is people who don't have a faith that are looking at the way that they are treating their own family and the way that the family of God is treating their own family. Say, I won't obey it. It is their devotion to attending to the needs of others that allows them to succeed and to grow. Because of the job that I have, I've been allowed access and entrance into places that I really have no business being. The deathbed of people that I'm really not that close to. And whenever we start to talk about what they're going through, they tell me, I just don't know how someone who doesn't have a church family goes through something like this. Sometimes I get to meet with people who at various times have considered walking away from faith because of dark times in their life, or maybe just walking away from a church. And whenever I ask them, what is it that kept you there? They say, whenever my husband walked out on me, they were there in Christ. Whenever I buried my child, they were the ones that stayed up late into the night, holding. It doesn't make any sense, but you've experienced that. If you're a part of this body, if you are a member here, if you are devoted to fellowship, you have experienced that kind of love, that kind of devotion. And my question is, how can you withhold that from somebody else? If you've experienced it, how can you withhold your financial means, your time, your emotional energy, the resources that God has given to you? How can you withhold giving that to somebody else? Because this is the defining mark that sets the Christians apart from the world, is by their love. John 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus didn't say. The world's going to know that you're my disciples because of the name that's on the door from them. Because you hold to this teaching, this set of beliefs. He says they're going to know that you're my disciples. It's going to be so unique. It's going to be so beautiful. There's no words to describe it. By you're another. And every single week that we gather together, we have a time where we are attending others. It may not always look in the same shape that it does right now, but this morning we're going to close. I'm going to close this time that I'm sharing with you so we can attend to one another. So if you have a need, a burden that you need to have someone else carry with you, then you can come to the front. Maybe you don't want to do it publicly. You can come and catch me afterwards. You can come to anyone in this building. Go to them and allow them to share the burden with you, as we are devoted to gathering, to attend. But we also are devoted to attending. May we be like the first church was. If there's some way that we can help, we're going to stand and sing together.